So, today is March 25th, 2023. I'm here with my grandpa, William Putnam, and we're about to do the American Heritage Family History assignment. So, Grandpa,
Yes.
how long have you lived here in the United States?
73 years.
73 years. And are all 73 of those years spent here in Utah?
No, we moved to California and lived in California for about 13 years.
Okay, why was that?
For work, I've got a job down there, and I went to work down in California.
Super cool.
So
work took you down to California.
yes.
That's a lot of fun. So, for today, we kind of want to dive into a couple questions that I've thought of that maybe you can just reflect on and share a little bit about your experience with our country and your development and our family's history living in the United States. So we'll jump into it.
Okay.
So I guess first off, how has living in the United States throughout your life made you reflect on freedom?
Well, I guess the fact that we can listen and play any kind of music we wanted. We could go to church and choose the church that we wanted.
Mm-hmm.
I went to public schools, and so schooling was pretty important. As a young boy, I remember worrying about the Cuba incident and whether we were going to get bombed. And so in grade school, we had the drills of climbing under the desk in case of bombs.
Wow.
And also that was for earthquakes also. We would climb. You had to crunch up underneath your desk in grade school. But I have always as a very young boy we would play army.
Oh yeah.
And so it was I've always had a thing for the army and for the military and our freedoms. And
because I'm sure that generation before you, that was World War II.
They were all World War II, right? And so there was a lot of surplus army equipment around where we could get helmets and we could get coats and all that kind of stuff. And we had, when I was real young, we had a big field across the street, and so we'd go in that big field and dig huts and play army and stuff like that.
Wow.
But then after that, when I was like in fourth grade, I had a friend in there, and his dad was a pilot in the military, and he was stationed out at the air base here in Salt Lake. And one day he says, if we hurry home and get up on my roof, my dad's gonna fly by and tilt his wing at us in his jet. And so we hurried home and we climbed up on the roof, and he came overhead and tilted his wing at us, and that was so cool. And I've always loved the military and being involved with that. And then as I got older, I learned that one of our relatives was General Israel Putnam, who he fought at Bunker Hill, and he was a general who made the statement, "Don't shoot till you see the whites of their eyes."
Yeah, I've heard of that. We've actually studied parts of that.
And so he was the one that said that because they were short on ammunition, and so he's the one that said, "Don't shoot till you see the whites of their eyes." but then when I became of age, the Vietnam War had started, and some of my friends had got their classification and stuff, but I went down and wanted to join the Marines. But I had some kidney problems as a kid. And so when I went for my physical, I didn't pass it because of the kidney thing, and the doctor wouldn't sign me off, and so I wasn't able to go to Vietnam. But I had a lot of friends that went. I had a couple of friends that were killed over there.
Is that something that you wanted to do, or?
Yes, I wanted to join the Marines. I wanted to be part of the military to fight for our freedom.
Yeah.
And so freedom's always been a big thing with me, growing up, and so I felt bad not being able to join the Marines, but right after I was married, I was able to get in the sheriff's office, and I felt that kind of
a public service.
Yeah, that kind of paid for. At least I was able to serve.
Yeah.
In some capacity.
That's super cool.
And so I've always loved this country, and I've always loved the military and the law enforcement and first responders and everything like that.
And what county was that where you were?
I was in Salt Lake County.
Salt Lake County. That's super cool. That's wonderful. What can you tell us about kind of our family's heritage in seeking that freedom? Like whether it be coming here to Utah or to the United States.
Well, we always just grew up in Utah, and of course Utah's always been a free country, and the freedom of religion, especially in Utah, is really strong, and short the church has always promoted freedom of religion, and they've always promoted following the Constitution and learning the Constitution, and so I think because of how strong I felt, and Grandma also felt, we both felt strong about being free, and I think that when President Kennedy was shot, it affected both Mom and I.
Really? How so?
Well, it just how quickly somebody's attitude can take everything away from you, and then there was such a big controversy over how he was shot, and all the big investigations and conspiracies and everything that was going on, and so it made you realize more about your freedom, and of course Grandma and I both grew up with Martin Luther King era, and all the race riots and everything, civil rights movement, and it made us appreciate our heritage, and by the same token, being from Utah, we could sympathize with the blacks more, and when we grew up, there weren't very many here, and so we didn't really realize the significance of the
movement.
Yeah, the movement and everything. So I think just our example of what we believe and stuff rubbed off on our kids and stuff.
Raising them,
yeah.
So with growing up through events like the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement, the Cuban Missile Crisis you mentioned.
Yeah.
How did when you look back on those events, how do you think that affects us today in this country?
Well, I think the example that we set kind of rubbed off on our children, and then they, especially the older children, they, because of our values, they had those same values. They didn't, and they passed it on to their kids. We had, I know one tradition that we had growing up, or as a family on the 4th of July, everyone would get together to celebrate it, and we would decorate a float, and we had the big Mill Creek parade that all our kids were able to be in that parade and stuff. But I think even up until till Grandma passed away, we would get together on the 4th of July, and I think that's how that was passed on to you a little bit.
Oh yeah.
And so
I remember those parades. Those were
so
staples.
Those same traditions were passed on just through our strong beliefs in our freedom and what we enjoyed.
Mm-hmm. Definitely that sense of patriotism,
right?
And like allegiance to our country,
and having relatives early on when the country was being developed gave me a stronger sense of why they were fighting for our freedoms, and
during like those Revolutionary War times. Having ancestors.
Israel Putnam, and I think his brother was also like a colonel in the militia and stuff like that. So,
in what ways do you think our family's political preference has affected us throughout the years?
Well, I think we're actually split.
Yeah.
Like I was more.
I think most families are.
I wouldn't say I was staunch Republican.
Right.
My beliefs were that I would study the candidates, and it didn't matter what party they belonged to. I voted for the person that I thought would do the best job. Where Grandma was staunch Democrat, and
why do you think that is?
Because her mother was staunch Democrat. Even up till today,
and that probably has to do with great grandma's upbringing.
Right. Granny.
Democratic Party helped with the World War II.
Yeah.
Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Yeah, and
brought us out of the war.
So Granny was a very staunch Democrat, and I think Grandma just followed along. I don't think she really knew why she was Democrat. It's because her mother was Democrat.
It was her upbringing.
Yeah, and so, so we learned early on to not discuss it.
Really?
Between us, because
you knew there were differences.
Absolutely, and she was very staunch and strong about her opinions on those things, as well as I was. But I wasn't, like I said, I wasn't straight Republican. I voted for the person.
Right.
And I had a very good friend who ran for Davis County Sheriff, and he had Republican beliefs, but the only party that he could run on was the Democratic Party. And so he had to run on the Democratic Party to become Davis County Sheriff, and he actually won.
Interesting.
In Davis County, yeah. So.
Wow. So with what you've experienced in your life and the history that you've seen kind of unfold, in what direction do you see that propelling our country? Where do you think this country's going?
Well, I have some pretty strong opinions about
That's okay.
about that. When I was with the sheriff's office, and then I became a bodyguard.
Mm-hmm.
I got into plainclothes work more and started studying what was going on in the country, because we started having a lot of, in the 60s we had the hippie movement, and everybody was fighting for freedom, and there was like the traditional establishment, you might say, who they had very strong opinions of you're going to do it this way, and they were kind of forcing their opinions on everyone coming up.
Sure.
And so we saw things like the Kent State incident, where the students at Kent State were protesting, and the military went in and started shooting them up. Mm-hmm. And it made you realize, well, wait a minute, we're a free country. That shouldn't be going on.
Right.
And so so it made me take a second look at what was going on, and I more or less looked at a world view of how political things work, rather than just in the United States. And I've always been a strong believer in that things are controlled by the money people. And it doesn't matter, in my opinion, it doesn't matter who you are or what you are. When you get higher up in the government, you're being told what you will do and what you won't do. And that goes.
And we've seen that in other countries.
Exactly. Well, the Marxist groups and stuff like that. But
sure.
But what's going on right now it started out as the Illuminati, and it's now called the Bilderberger Group. And that consists of the most wealthy people in the world, and they meet once a year and discuss what's going on in the world. And what they discuss is control of oil, control of commodities, and world trade, and so they more or less control what's going on in the world rather than individual governments. And
how do you think that affects the United States as a single country?
Well, I think that there are certain politicians that are part of this group, and I think it affects the way some areas in the country are being run. But when people finally realize what's going on, we still have the freedom that we can vote them out or vote them in, or vote someone else in with a different opinion.
Yeah. And
so that's the plus of freedom in America. But you've seen through this last election how some of those freedoms are really starting to be controlled just by the big hassles over the voting.
Sure. That
took place, and how people were trying to sway one way or the other by control, and it was who could pump the most money into what party, and so they try to sway people's opinions, and unfortunately there's a lot of Americans that don't think for themselves.
Yeah, I think we see that. A lot.
And a lot of people don't investigate deep enough.
Some are just ill-informed.
or what they take what's on the news for gospel
Sure.
truth, and rather than okay, the news says this, but I'm going to look into it
Check your
deeper
source,
and check my own source.
Yeah.
And so,
What can you tell us about your experience in the workforce from a young age to when you retired?
well, my very first job, I was 8 years old,
Really?
and I sold. They were called Spud Nuts, and they were glazed donuts in a bag.
Mm-hmm.
And the truck would come at 7 o'clock in the morning and pick up a couple of my friends and I. We all got on it, and then they would drop us off with a big basket full of these Spud Nuts, and we had an area that we would go door to door. They would drop us off and then pick us up later on in the day. And so I think we got something like a nickel a bag for what we sold.
Oh, wow.
Or something, and those big baskets were heavy.
Dang.
But anyway, that was my very first job that I had. And like I said, I was like 8 years old.
So this is like early 1950s?
Yeah, I mean, it would have been 1958, yeah.
Okay.
And then, so I did that for a summer. And then when I was, like in 1963, I was 13, not really legal to be working, but I had a friend that was running the Travelers Oil gas station, and I was kind of hanging out there. And so I would do odd jobs and he would pay me, and then as soon as I could, I started pumping gas and changing tires and learning about automobiles, and so that was really my second job, was at Travelers Oil, learning mechanics and all about that stuff. But the pay was really low.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had a friend that went to work at Arbeck's department store, and the money was like double what I was making at Travelers Oil. And so
Really?
he got me, when there was an opening, he got me a job at Arbeck's. And so I worked in what they called the marking room. And that's where all the product came in, and they would put the prices on them, and then part of what we would do is take them up to the different departments and take the products up there. And that went on for like a year and a half. And then there was an opening in the delivery system, and Arbeck's had a fleet of trucks in which they used to deliver all the packages to people that would buy them in the store. And we had like 8 or 10 routes throughout the city, and as far north as Logan and as far south as Provo. And so I got a job delivering packages. And so I worked there in the delivery, and that was a lot more money than the marking room. And so that went on until after I was married. And then I got with the sheriff's office, and became pretty friendly with Grandma's uncle, who owned the tea room in Arbeck's. And we got talking, and we thought, well, it'd be kind of fun to open a sandwich shop on Main Street. And so we kind of got together, and I was still doing the sheriff thing, but we opened up a sandwich shop, and so I was working different things, and Grandma kind of ran the sandwich shop. And
this was your early 20s, right?
Early 20s, yeah. We like 22.
Yeah.
something like that, and so we had this sandwich shop, and um, Cameron, my brother-in-law, I guess he's your uncle, right?
Great uncle.
Great uncle, yeah. Cameron, Kim's brother.
Mm-hmm.
He was a teenager, but he came down and he was working there, helping make sandwiches, but he would do the dishes, and keep things going and stuff like that. And so he worked there for us for a summer or two, and but it was such a small place, and the rent was so high, and then halfway through we were doing really pretty good, and then suddenly, just like lately, how the price of everything has just gone sky high. Well, they did that when we had that, and so all our goods, the prices went way out of sight, and we couldn't.
The 70s.
Yeah, we couldn't charge enough. I couldn't, raise the sandwiches high enough to make any money.
Yeah.
Otherwise, people wouldn't buy them. But the food costs for me were higher than what I could make.
Right.
And so we ended up having to close the sandwich shop because we couldn't make ends meet.
What was the name of that shop?
It was called Captain's Counter.
Captain's Counter.
Yeah, and it was on Main Street between 2nd and 3rd South on the east side of the street. Right next to us was called Sherm's Nut Shop. So people could smell our roast beef, and they could smell the nuts, and so people would stop and look in the front windows there on Main Street. And so we did really good in the beginning, but
wow,
it just got to be.
Well, that's quite an experience. I mean, to own a business, and
I still had to have 2 jobs.
Yeah.
That's the problem with Utah. In order to make a living here, you had to have 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet. And so,
yeah, and it's only getting more expensive. So.
Yeah.
Well, I guess final question. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience in raising a family in the United States? I know you touched on it a little bit, but I guess with doing that, what were some challenges and what were some benefits or some experiences you had?
I guess one of the benefits is that we had public schools that the kids could get an education and go to school, and then we had the freedom of belief or religion, so that we could go to where we wanted, and then as they got older, our family's always been kind of sports minded, and so and that's where we noticed a big difference was how almost a lot of the families in Utah had their kids in little leagues, and they were able to play whatever they wanted. It wasn't forced on them. But when we moved to California, and when Paul, our oldest son, was old enough, we tried to get him into a little league football team in the Whittier, Santa Fe Springs area. And what we noticed there is that everybody there spoke Spanish. And so he just sat the bench because he couldn't understand what they were saying. And we kind of saw how if you live in a predominantly, and that was Santa Fe Springs, and South Whittier was predominantly Hispanic, and so he wasn't able to play
Really?
because he couldn't speak. He sat the bench the whole year, and so.
Well, that's kind kind of interesting. I guess you wouldn't necessarily get that in Salt Lake City.
Yeah, in Utah.
But there are parts of the United States where you'll get predominantly Hispanic.
And it's still that way in California.
Oh yeah, I experienced that when I lived in San Diego. So.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think it's quite fascinating. You know, it's still that mixing pot that the United States originally was.
Yeah.
That it has become known as.
But see, in Utah now has become a lot more diversified because of the Tongan community and the Hispanic community, and now we have more blacks in the area, and so it's a lot more diversified, and it's not singled out as much as it was down there in California. It was really noticeable in California. Mm. So, but we have always raised our kids to be patriotic and believe in the government, and then when they got old enough, you know, we made it a point to let them know that it's your decision what you want to do, you know, and different things.
You gave them that same freedom that the country.
Right. And fortunately, there wasn't a draft or anything that forced them into military if they had to, and our children all love sports, so they were so involved in sports they didn't drift off into the ROTC or other things like that, which is okay, but we weren't involved in that aspect of it.
Yeah. Well, Grandpa, if you had to leave us with a final piece of advice for those growing and developing in the United States of America, what would that be?
Well, my main advice would be to search things out for yourself. Don't let people persuade you in your beliefs, and always, you know, keep an open mind. Always respect somebody else's opinion. You know, that's very important, and I think to respect their opinion, because that's what freedom is. We each have our own. We each have our own ideas of how things are, and so, but to research it and find out for yourself what's right and what's wrong, and what party's right, what party's wrong. Sometimes neither party's right. Sometimes you have to just like I know all my life. I just voted for the person. I was never a party person, and I think that all came when I was involved in law enforcement, and I could see how things were guided by politics and stuff, and so I always believed in finding the right person to do the job, and I think this country would be much better off if more people would do that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Your input has been really, really fun and exciting. So, thank you.
You're welcome. I'm glad I could help you out.
Yeah, this is fun. Okay, we'll end the interview here.
Okay.